No,
So
that's great. What I enjoy doing in this conference is getting information from one speaker and being able to ask other speakers about it. So I can run everything past nutritional experts. So but I appreciate where your expertise is in. So what specific challenges did you face in conveying the complex relationship between dietary choices and planetary health in the documentary to the general public?
well, the fact that um, the meat and dairy industries have been so effective in lobbying governments for support and getting uh, milk into schools, for example, and subsidies so that these industries continue, and getting them embedded in nutrition guidelines, etc. That's been incredibly effective, even though it's led to the Western diet, of course, which is totally unhealthful. But that's been incredibly effective. So we're up against that. And the fact that they advertise, and if you look at the advertising on any platform, you'll find that about half of it is food. And most of that is the foods that make them a lot of money, which is the junk foods. So in the face of that advertising, it's very hard to convince your 2-year-old to eat their peas, for example. So all of those things must change. But some people seeing the documentary Eating Our Way to Extinction, that's the first they've heard, which is to me alarming. Because this information's been out there for a long time, but the information is getting through. The last IPCC conference, they actually had a section a day on food systems, and now it's in the documents, and it's recognised that food systems must be addressed if we're going to address climate change. In fact, it's the major part of climate change, if my work is correct.
So what signs do you see that this information is getting more and more out into the public sphere? I think a lot of people are completely unaware of this aspect of the environmental impact of their food when they tend to think of challenges to the environment in the form of climate change or any other aspect. Animal agriculture is almost invisible, I think, in the mainstream mind. So what are you seeing that gives you hope that this is changing?
Yeah, well, the beef consumption in the US has been trending down for a few years. There's lots of reports out there. Actually, the last interesting one that I saw was only a couple of weeks ago, and it had a figure on German consumption, and the figure was just over 50%. It might have been 60% even, but a large proportion of Germans don't eat meat every day. In some Western countries, you expect to eat meat every day, but in Germany now, most of the population don't. So, and the numbers are growing. We're coming off a very small base of the numbers of vegan and vegetarian, but I believe the growth rate is quite something, and that's getting through a lot to the younger generations who are more open to change. People of my age, the oldies, we're pretty much set in our ways. Even though I'm vegan now, because I know the harms that are done, and whenever I get to cook, which is most nights, those who are here don't complain. And that filters through. But yeah, it's definitely getting through. And you might think that, like Jonathan Foley says, it happens very, very, very slowly, and then all at once. I think that's going to happen. I think that we will hit a brick wall. More of us will be living in our cars. More of us will have lost their homes. More of us will have died from heat exhaustion. More of us will have lost a loved one from a flood, And that's the face. It's the extreme weather now that's going to get us. Last year was an incredibly hot year. Whether it's an outlier or not, we don't know, but the trend is definitely up in that direction. And there's all these tipping points that have been had. There's Bangladesh is a classic example. It's a country that lives on a floodplain, largely. They have a lot of industry, they have a lot of people, and they have a lot of industries, but they're very, very affected by water feeding their agriculture. And because the floodwaters haven't been as consistent from the ice melt and snow melt, they now get floods and they get droughts. And I saw a photo recently of the border between India and Bangladesh, and that border has armed patrols on the Indian side, armed patrols manning a huge man-proof razor wire topped fence, because the Indians know that when the next drought hits, which is just a matter of time, when the next drought hits, if there's a way for the Bangladeshis to swap borders to walk onto Indian soil, they will, because that's natural. What would you do if you can't feed the family? You have to lift up stumps and move. So this is the problem. This is the pressure that we're going to face. More and more of us will be faced with it either personally or someone we know. And it's becoming more people that we know. But it's going to be more extreme. The next cyclone that comes through is we might lose our roof. It's a little inconvenience, but it's part of the new normal. If this is a 1 in 100-year event, then I must be 500 years old. These numbers don't mean anything anymore. They're talking about 1 in 1,000-year events. What does that even mean? It means that it's out of our control anymore. It's extreme, and we can't stop it, except by rewilding a bunch of land. Where do we find that land? Grazing land.
So, and that obviously, it sounds like it is the root of your optimism, that there are viable solutions that people in their individual choices can help influence. So now, speaking of individual choices, you mentioned people replacing meat, right? Like in Germany, they're eating less meat. What are they replacing it with? Are they, because a lot of times people go from red meat to fish or chicken, or you go from eating animal products in the form of meat flesh to being a vegetarian, but you're eating tons of dairy. What are you seeing, which have very similar footprints on it? What are you seeing meat be replaced with?
You're dead right. 30 years ago, when I stopped eating meat, I thought to myself, well, what do you eat if you don't eat meat? And that's a real concern for a lot of people. But I would aim them towards all of the help that's out there. There's a lot. And also the Eating Our Way to Extinction website has transition guides. It has food guides. It has nutrition information. It has cookbooks, and it has how-tos. And there are campaigns in many countries where people can mentor you through this process. But I would suggest that people look at indigenous foods. For example, Central American foods high on beans, corn. These are foods that are highly nutritious, and they've sustained those populations for a long time in great health. So that's where we should look. We look at the blue zones, for example, around the world, where people live over 100 and productively, and we find that they eat very little meat, a lot of fruit and vegetables, and indigenous foods that they've eaten for a long time, and they don't need a lot of meat to survive. but it is, I sympathize. It is a big transition for a lot of people, but there is help out there, definitely.
And I'm actually talking to someone in the background, and she's talking about baby steps, right? Because she enjoys meat. And so what do you see as the baby steps that people can take that it makes it more accessible to them? Because obviously the idea of going from eating the standard American diet, tons of processed food, tons of animal products, to going plant-based is not realistic for most people, not only because it scares them, but they don't even know how to do it. So what do you see as accessible baby steps that people can take today that would make this more likely to happen?
Mm. Um, yeah, baby steps. Well, children these days are pretty picky eaters. At present, it's school holidays, and we have three of our grandchildren staying with us, from 5 up until 13. And tonight we had nachos made of beans, not beef. So, yeah, beans are incredibly nutritious, but they're also pretty darn tasty when you do it the Mexican way. But the other things you can substitute, as well, like a lot of Italian food, for example. There's a lot of uh, uh, you know so many different vegetables cooked in so many different ways. I remember when I went to Italy 10 years ago, um, the most delicious meal I had was sitting in this old medieval village overlooking and we were eating a local pasta made with locally grown mushrooms, and it was absolutely delicious. So yeah, I see in the comments, mushrooms. It can be turned into amazing steak, barbecue ports, or carnitas, whatever that is. Yeah, so I look to the indigenous foods for that. A lot of Asian foods, tofu, of course, it's a fermented food. And just north of us here, Indonesia, on the most populous island in the world, Java, you've got 100 million people, and one of their most popular things that they eat is tempeh, which is almost like it's whole beans fermented, whole soybeans fermented. Tofu is one of the most nutritious things. Soy curls, someone says. Yeah. So, those sort of foods, fermented foods are really good for our guts, of course. And, tofu, we eat a lot.
So we have some audience.
Fruit and veggies, they're the big ones.
Oh yeah, of course, absolutely. So we've got some audience members who have some questions. So I'm going to open up to the audience. Dominique, if you can unmute yourself, Dominique V, and then state your name, or sorry, state your name, where you're from, and ask your question.
Hi, my name is Dominique. I'm from Canada. And of course, Canada is a very cold country, and we are not seeing a lot of effects right now. So people are kind of secure in their thinking that we are protected against climate crisis. The thing is that really bothering me, and I'm pretty anxious about, is the food security, because as vegans we eat a lot of fruit, vegetables, and everything. But I heard, and maybe I'm wrong, but I heard that after beyond 39 degrees Celsius, the pollinizers are no longer effective. And as we know, we have our food system, is based on 85% of pollinized food. So I'm wondering, do you know, first of all, is that true after 39 degrees? And what about our food security with climate crisis? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a really good question. When we find that the supermarket doesn't carry everything we want, by the way, it's not us, it's not the wealthy nations that will suffer so much with climate change. It's the poor nations. You know, they're the ones who, if we have a disaster situation where there's limited food, who's going to get that food? It's the ones with the money. So the wealthy nations will be served first, sadly. And as we've seen, climate change is affecting the poor nations. You know, they're the bulk of the refugees. So, yes, climate change is going to affect crops. One thing it does do, the excess carbon dioxide in the atmosphere stimulates plant growth. So the plants will grow faster under a high carbon dioxide atmosphere. However, the way we've been fertilizing and the way we've treated our soils, the plants are getting less nutritious. They've got fewer of the trace vitamins and minerals and phytonutrients and so on. So they grow bigger, but they're maybe not as nutritious. Also, the areas that we can farm are changing. You know, there's some shock horror stories about, oh no, we can't grow grapes in this region anymore. We can't make wine because it's too hot. Some of those, that's common. And we may have to go back to heritage foods that can tolerate all sorts of different environments. I mean, you know, Australian Aborigines were living in the hottest continent, which is a land of droughts and flooding rains, and they were doing fine. And 90% of their diet was from root vegetables, which grow rain, hail, or shine, and in the ground it's cooler than above the ground. So yeah, there are solutions. Definitely, the climate will affect yields. I've heard figures that yields are going to decrease by about 20%. And also that the species won't be able to grow. So we're going to have to do a lot of research on that. 39 degrees, I haven't heard that number, but I do know that humans can't live much beyond that. We die. So not a matter of just turning the aircon on. If we can, we're lucky, but most people can't. So yes, there might be migration. There might be a bunch of Americans knocking at the Canada doorstep saying, "Let us in." I'm joking, but yes, it is going to be an issue. But as I say, an issue we can solve. We can tame the climate, reverse the climate. That's the beauty of methane. Methane is an incredible thing. It only lasts about 12 years or so in the atmosphere. Therefore, it is the only emission that we emit that if we reduce it by a dramatic amount, it will cause cooling. And the people who are arguing that we're overvaluing methane, and they argue that a certain level of constant emissions is okay, and that it's only if we emit more that we've got a problem. But they also model that if we emit less, hey, we're going to get cooling. So but you know, strangely, the arguments are that if we slash methane, we can cool this planet. We can solve these things, and we can even find that carbon dioxide is a short-term pollutant if we can grow enough trees to soak that down. So, you know, I believe I think that we're going to hit dangerous climate change a lot quicker than we expect. But I also believe that we humans are slow but not stupid, and we will come against the real solutions, which are trees. So eat plants, plant trees.
Thank
you
you
for that. So our next question, and if you can go ahead and mute yourself again, that'd be great. So our next question is coming from Stephen V. If you could state where you're from and ask your question. hold on a second here. There we go.
I'm from,
I'm sorry, Stevie, did you want to ask the question?
yeah, I'm from Buffalo, New York, and just a very good presentation. Um, a brief comment, I've made that transition to whole foods, plant-based about more than a decade ago. But I must say that none of my friends are particularly interested. I mean, that's been my experience, even though I've had great results health-wise, and they're sort of in their late 60s having considerable health problems. Um, Now, you made the transition 30 years ago. I did not find the transition easy, I must say. It was a real struggle. I'm wondering what your experience was and what, how effective you are in getting maybe your friends and family to eat healthier.
Yeah, your closest friends and family are your biggest critics normally. Yeah, well, okay. Well, so my personal experience is I had a health crisis and needed to change my diet radically, which I did. I've been vegetarian for 30 years and vegan for probably the last 20 years. I've never worried about getting certain nutrients. I've never worried about B12. I've never worried about getting enough protein. I mean, I'm 70 and I run once or twice a week. It's a 5K run. It's not long. I play golf. I walk around. I'm fitter and healthier than I've probably ever been in my life. I had a health crisis when I was in my 30s. So you can do it, and there is information out there, of course. But how do you convince friends and family? What I found is that the greatest people won't do what you tell them to do, but they will copy your example, or they will talk about your example to their friends who will then copy that example. We have no idea how powerful it is just by being vegan. One individual being vegan is extremely powerful. A lot of people will hear about that and it will become normalized. And the science says that when we get to, we've got to bump off the older generation, but when we get to the point where the younger generations do turn en masse, if 25% of the population turn to vegan or close to it, that is a tipping point. And then it will be, rather than, oh, that's weird being not eating animal products, to, oh, you still eat meat? That's the way it'll be. So personally, don't worry about other people. Don't try to change the world. Just do yourself. And that's the most powerful thing you can do. Certainly, listen to this sort of, as you're doing, listen to these presentations, find out the facts, repeat the facts to people when you get the chance. Don't bully them with it, but just talk about it. That's how we change. People are being bombarded with meat advertising every day, lots of it. So it's the talk, it's the influence that you have when you don't think you're having influence. That counts. That really counts. Yeah. So does that answer your question?
Actually, they dropped down. Yeah, I think that addressed their question. So our next question is coming from Stacy A. Please state where you're from and ask your question, Stacy.
Hi, I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area in California. Thank you, Gerard. This is far and away the most densely packed and useful talk I've heard so far. This was absolute brilliance. And you did kind of answer one of my questions with the previous questioner, so I'm not going to go into that. But I did have another. You were talking about encouraging people to buy only deforestation-free beef and how even that change alone would have a massive effect. how do we know that deforestation-free beef isn't going to be another tool of greenwashing, same way that maybe buying carbon offsets for air travel is greenwashing?
Yeah, no, you did right. I read that study with a bit of skepticism because how can you tell? I mean, JBS, it's their business model to keep it all muddy. So they're not going to clarify things because a few consumers ask for it. But it's that sort of thing. It's the pressure from the funding bodies. It's influencing the superannuation funds and the finance funds that fund JBS, and it's to the tunes of billions of dollars, hundreds of billions, and others. That's where we can bring pressure to bear on industries. Shareholders can bring pressure to bear. And that's been done, and it's happening for climate, and it's happening to great effect. And now Europe have instituted the New Deal, where none of the products that are imported into Europe are to be connected with deforestation. So this is powerful. That's only just happened, but it's going to change whole supply chains. It means that JBS need to clean up their act, and they need to show that they're not sourcing beef from people who are still doing deforestation, even though they're driving it, of course. But Europe has changed their mind. They're saying, no, we're not going to take any deforestation beef anymore. So that and any other product, by the way, palm oil, you name it. So that's going to mean a big change to all the suppliers of all products that come from the land to Europe. So if other nations follow that, and Europe's pretty got a lot of purchasing power, if other nations follow that, you might find the world will change through that mechanism alone.
To Stacy's point, though, when it comes to finding deforestation-free animal products, how do we ensure we're when someone's promoting it, that we're not walking into something like the idea of like free range and cage-free eggs, when they're listed as free range and cage-free, and people feel so wonderful about their choices, only to find out that free range can mean they were let outside for a minute a day, or cage free means they're not in a cage anymore, but there's 10,000 chickens on top of each other with their beaks cut off and their claw, and their talons cut off, and they're jammed in. So it's not really an improvement in the quality of life. It's really just a change in the suffering, or the change in the way they present it to the world, but the impact is still the same. So how do we, is there a way, or are there brands that have been guaranteed are actually deforestation free? Is there a way to know that you're actually making a meaningful choice to move things in the right direction?
Yeah, no, sorry, I should have answered that. That's the reason why I laughed at that study a bit, because you can't tell. Even if they've got a label on the packet, deforestation free, I would be highly skeptical of that, unless there was some government mandated system of scrutiny of that. And this is where industry's been so good at the greenwash. For example, regenerative grazing, or regenerative ranching has been held up as this wonderful thing, even though it's got no basis in fact. But it's great marketing, so it's going to be used again and again and again. A good example is the Australian Meat and Livestock Australia, MLA. They about 5 years ago, they implemented this new program, carbon neutral by 2030 for red meat, for beef, which did my head in, because I know how much deforestation is continuing for beef. So what's happened is that last year there was a study came out that looked at the number of cattle in Australia, and it's always been about the same number of cattle as the people. So there's been about high 20 million cattle, but this study found that there's another 50%. So they've undercounted the cattle in Australia by it's 50% more than what they've counted. So MLA are looking at this and thinking, well, if there's 50% more cattle, how on earth are we going to say there's less methane? Because they've got to argue that for the carbon neutral beef, and they can't. So what they've done is they've quietly shelved their carbon neutral by 2030 claims. That's if held to account, and in Australia it's pretty good. There's a pretty good system of holding industry to account. So we need those systems. This is why I think the European system is going to be so powerful, because the whole supply chain will have to be scrutinised. So I think that's the sort of answer. But in a country where you have advertising that can say what they please and little government oversight, it's buyer beware. So if I saw a label that said deforestation-free beef, I'd be very surprised for a start, and I wouldn't believe it.
Thank you. So we've got about 3 minutes left. So I'm going to ask a question, and then just also if you have any concluding comments that you'd like to leave people with in the next 3 minutes. So how do you address criticisms from animal agriculture regarding the environmental impact of meat production portrayed in the film and in your work? And then any final thoughts?
Look, there hasn't been that much criticism. Normally there is, but what we've strived for with Eating Our Way to Extinction is that everything we say in that documentary is backed up by the science. It's all fact-based. It's not someone's observation. So that's how we've kept it to the science. That was my job. So that's how we got it there. Just one thing I might mention, there's in the comments is saying that 90% of soybeans are GM. That's true. And that's the 90% that's fed to animals. The soybeans that's fed to humans is mostly organic, at least in Australia, and most probably Europe, and probably North America as well. But it's less than 10% of soybean global production that goes to humans. Most of it goes to animals, and there are no laws that, except in Europe now, that say no GM animal feed. So that's that answer. Sorry, there's one other question. Can you repeat that? What else?
Well, I was talking about criticism by the agricultural industry, and then just sort of final wrap up. We've got 1 minute, so if there's any message that you'd like to leave the audience with before you conclude.
Yeah, well, I guess the main thing is that our situation is a lot more dire than we realise. That global warming is accelerating now as the skies clear. That deforestation is still rampant. All of these things are contributing to tipping points. The Amazon looks like it may have reached a tipping point. The lungs of the planet. However, this is a good news story, and it all comes down to land use. If we can change enough land back to forest the way it used to be, we can solve most of the problems that the environment faces today. We could have a healthy wildlife. We could stop biodiversity loss in its tracks. We could stop climate change in its tracks. We could stop deforestation. We will grow healthier. There's so many things that this fixes. So many things. It's profound. And all it takes is eat plants, plant trees. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for all the information that you shared with us today. So if we could please unmute the audience so they can share their appreciation.
Thank you.
Thank
you so much.
Thank
So
you.
much. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Super interesting.